So Sukekuni was already moving, not preparing, not weighing options. Moving down toward the water, with 80 men behind him in the darkness of a November morning pressing in from every direction. The ships had appeared at the mouth of the harbor. Not one or two, not a scouting party. Hundreds. The fires on their decks were still lit. They'd been sailing through the night. Sukekuni sent riders forward, fast, down to the shore, where the first Mongol soldiers were already wading in from the shallows. The riders carried a message, a request to negotiate. They got within shouting distance. Arrows came back. The riders turned. The beach filled with soldiers. Sukekuni gave the order, and by 4 in the morning the fighting had started. 80 mounted samurai against something they couldn't yet see the edges of. There's a second moment. It has nothing to do with the first, or so it seems. A shrine on Tsushima Island. October 5th. The building sits in a remote stretch of forest, well away from any settlement. No one nearby. No one to start a fire. The roof catches. White pigeons come from the north first, dozens of them, landing on the ridge of the roof just before the smoke starts rising. A strange grouping of birds in a place that rarely sees them. Sukekuni hears about this and does something unusual. He doesn't dismiss it. He puts the entire island under military rule. Not because he was a superstitious man. Because the shrine was dedicated to Hachiman, the god of war. And because the birds came from the north. And because the island of Tsushima sits almost exactly between Japan and the Korean peninsula, and Sukekuni had been watching the sea lanes for months. The fire at the empty shrine was the detail that moved him from preparation to mobilization. A month later, those ships appeared. Now take those 2 moments and hold them separately. There's a third, Hakata Bay, farther up the Japanese coast. A different battle, a different samurai. His name was Takezaki Suenaga. He was not a lord, not a senior commander. A low-ranking warrior with a unit under him, waiting in a defensive position while a Mongol formation moved across difficult ground. His commanding officer had given explicit orders to hold. Wait for the enemy to advance. Let the terrain do its work. Suenaga attacked anyway. He rode forward into the Mongol line. 2 of his horses were killed under him. A third went down in the mud. He fought on foot at some point, which is not how samurai were supposed to fight. He survived. Barely. If you enjoy watching history through the people who were actually there, this video deserves a like. It helps more people find it. A fourth moment, and this one is stranger than the others. After the fighting was over. After the Mongols pulled back from Hakata Bay after a single day. After the fires on the beach were cold and the Japanese were left on shore looking at the water. Suenaga had a problem. He'd disobeyed orders. He'd charged when he was told to hold. And the reward system of the Kamakura shogunate was built entirely on verified accounts of personal battlefield achievement. Without a formal record, his actions didn't happen. Without a reward, his household would struggle. His family's standing depended on what he could prove. So he sold his horses, then his saddles, then whatever else he had. He used the money to travel to Kamakura, the seat of the shogunate, to report his own deeds in person. Not with a letter. In person, because he understood that a letter could be ignored and a man standing in front of you is harder to dismiss. His petition worked. Years later, he took it further. He paid for the creation of illustrated scrolls documenting his battlefield conduct. Highly detailed drawings showing the weapons, the formations, the fighting, the chaos of that day. The scrolls show Mongol soldiers in layered composite armor, shorter and more uniform than the Japanese lamellar beside them. They show the ceramic shell casings, round, black-painted, drawn mid-flight between the lines, trailing smoke, with Japanese horses rearing beneath them. The horses themselves are depicted in specific detail. Individual animals mid-stride, mouths open, legs at full extension. You can see which ones are carrying armored riders and which have already lost them. Suenaga himself appears multiple times, identifiable by his banner, shown charging, shown unhorsed, shown fighting on foot. He chose to include the moments where things went wrong. The downed horses are in there. The mud is implied by the posture of the men around him. What he left out is telling too. There are no clean victories, no clean lines. The Mongol formations are shown as compressed blocks, their soldiers overlapping, their bows already raised before the Japanese cavalry has closed the distance. It is a picture of a gap between two armies that had never encountered each other before and had no shared assumption about how fighting was supposed to work. Those scrolls still exist. They're called the Moko Shurai Ekotoba. They are among the earliest visual records of the Mongol invasions of Japan. Almost everything historians and illustrators know about what the fighting looked like, the clothes, the armor, the weapons, the terrain, comes from pictures that Suenaga paid for out of his own pocket, about his own actions, because he needed a reward and the system required evidence. Hold that. Now come back to the beach at Tsushima. By nightfall on November 4th, Sukekuni was dead. The Mongol landing force had numbered somewhere around 8,000. Some sources put it higher, but even at 8,000, it was an overwhelming ratio against 80 mounted men. The fight had lasted from before dawn until dark. A final Japanese cavalry charge went in around dusk and was broken. One samurai, a man named Sukesada, reportedly killed 25 Mongol soldiers in individual combat before he went down. 25 separate engagements. His name was recorded because the scale of what he'd done was remarkable enough that someone survived to carry it back. Most did not. Now the fifth moment, the one that changes the shape of all the others. The Mongols left. After one day at Hakata Bay, after establishing a position on Japanese soil, after defeating every samurai force sent against them, after demonstrating conclusively that their weapons and tactics had no adequate counter, they turned around and sailed away. 18 days after first landing on Japanese shores, the invasion force withdrew. The reasons are still debated. Supply problems, the death of one of their senior generals to a samurai's arrow, the possibility that the whole campaign had been designed not as a full conquest, but as a probe. A large, violent reconnaissance mission ahead of a second, larger force to follow. Of the 30,000 men in that invasion, approximately 13,500 didn't make it back to Korea. Some were killed in the fighting. Many more went down in storms on the return crossing. The Japanese stood on a coastline they still held. They had no framework for understanding what had just happened to them. The samurai who faced the Mongols at Tsushima and at Hakata Bay were not simply outmatched in numbers. They were operating inside a set of rules that had no equivalent on the other side. A complete system of conduct built over centuries around individual recognition, personal honor, and the formality of single combat. A samurai was expected to announce himself before engaging, to call out to the enemy, give his name, his lineage, his intention, to find a worthy opponent, to fight one-on-one. The Mongol army moved in coordinated blocks, commanded by drum signal, advancing and retreating as a unit. They used explosive shells, gunpowder packed in ceramic, that burst on impact and scattered fire and shrapnel. They used poisoned arrows. They filled the air with projectiles and moved in mass formation and did not stop to listen to a man announce his lineage. The Japanese records describe the experience this way, that in their tradition, they must call out by name someone from the enemy, and then attack in single combat. But the Mongols took no notice of such conventions. They rushed forward together in a mass. That observation came from a Japanese soldier who survived. It reads less like a complaint, and more like a man trying to describe something he had no category for. Now speed up, because this is where those moments stop being separate. Sukekuni read the smoke from a shrine and mobilized. He died with 80 men on a beach. Suenaga disobeyed a direct order, survived, and spent everything he had to prove he'd done it. The Mongols landed, won every engagement, and left. And the shogunate, the government that Suenaga had traveled hundreds of miles to petition, found itself in an impossible position afterward. The samurai who had fought expected to be paid, The reward system was built on land granted from conquered territory. But Japan hadn't been conquered, it had been defended. There was no new land to distribute. The men who'd bled on those beaches got nothing, or close to nothing. The complaints multiplied. The loyalty of the warrior class began to crack at the edges. After 1274, the Japanese built walls. 19 kilometers of stone fortification around Hakata Bay, up to nearly 3 meters high. They changed how they trained. They changed what they were willing to do on a battlefield. They stopped calling out their names to people who would not listen. When the Mongols came back in 1281 with 100,000 men, Japan was ready. Not because of the famous storms that destroyed the fleet, though the storms were real, because for 7 years they had been building, adapting, turning the trauma of the first invasion into a different kind of army. Suenaga rode back into battle in 1281. He had his scrolls updated to include that campaign too. If you like this channel and want to see more videos that go at history this way, subscribing keeps the next one in your feed. And here is what connects all of it. Sukekuni moved because a shrine caught fire and white birds came from the north. That action, mobilizing on a detail that couldn't be verified, reacting to something that might have been coincidence, bought Japan the advance warning that shaped the entire opening of the invasion. He died for a few hours of notice. Suenaga broke orders because the system he lived inside was built on personal recognition, and he was not willing to let a moment pass unobserved. That refusal, that stubbornness, that need to be seen, is the reason those scrolls exist. The reason we have any visual record at all of what those invasions looked like. Every historian who has drawn on the Moko Shurai Ekotoba is drawing on Suenaga's decision to sell his horses. The samurai at Tsushima didn't fight because they believed they could win. They had 80 men. They knew the count on those ships. They fought because the code they'd been trained inside didn't have a provision for surrender against an unknown enemy on a defended island. The system carried them forward. And the system, that same rigid, ancient system, with its individual challenges and its formal announcements and its codes of conduct, was the thing that nearly destroyed Japan that November. The thing that made 8,000 Mongols feel like 30,000. The thing that made every single engagement unwinnable before it started. But it was also the thing that made Suenaga sell his horses and ride to Kamakura. The thing that made Sukekuni read a fire as a warning and act on it before he had confirmation. The thing that kept Japan from simply capitulating when the fleet appeared on the horizon. The same system that got them killed is the reason the record survived. That's not a clean lesson. It doesn't resolve into something comfortable. The walls went up, the tactics changed, the samurai learned to fight without announcing themselves. But they built those walls because men who couldn't adapt to a new kind of war had died holding a beach long enough for someone else to understand what was coming. The smoke rose from an empty shrine. Birds landed. A man put his island on alert. That's where it started. That's what it cost. And the picture of it, the actual drawing of what that fighting looked like, exists because someone refused to be forgotten.